We'll get to what happened after the game a little bit later on. There's lots to discuss on that. But let's first of all focus on what Everton and Frank Lampard have achieved now that they have secured their Premier League survival. They knew going into that game they needed a win to do that. They managed it in the end, and they had to do it with a second-half comeback. My goodness, Crystal Palace were looking good at half-time, 2-0 up in that game, but Everton came back to win it 3-2. Mission accomplished then for Frank Lampard. The question is, and I'm still seeing lots of reaction on Twitter, it's quite mixed as to whether or not it's actually been a good job done by Frank Lampard at Everton.
Oh, I think it is a very good job. I think it was initially slow getting out of the blocks. But I think if you've beaten Manchester United, Chelsea, and then to have come back from 2 goals down, as they did the other night, was, last night, the manner at which that happened, I think something special could be building. You know, you saw incredible scenes at the end of the game. I know lots of talk about them being on the pitch, the emotion, the atmosphere that's been created in their last number of games at home. They're kind of like the club has woken up again. And I think they've realised their expectations were maybe they'd gone a bit too far. They're looking at Liverpool next door, and they're trying to challenge with them. And just staying in the Premier League, to retain their Premier League status became something very dramatic, which they nearly lost. And I think now they're going to cherish that, but they need to build now. Then obviously the next step is they've secured safety, but now it's about building on that. And I think Lampard will, and I think it actually kind of unifies him a little bit more, well, a lot more, with where he is, the understanding of how big the club is. And somehow the club came together last night to get an incredible result. 2-0 down, Palace were dominating the game completely. So you have to give them credit for what they've done. And I think it was beyond their expectations. They thought they could actually scramble to safety last night. And of course, we were all watching the Burnley game, the Villa game, the drama with that, and Leeds with twiddling their thumbs at home, who've now got to win a game at Brentford. And if they don't do that, they're down.
Yeah, and again, we'll look ahead to the relegation picture a little bit later on. As you say, it's now just down to 2 as to who will go down with Watford and Norwich. But is he now proving his critics wrong, would you say, now that he's got Everton to safety?
Well, it depends if you think a critical observation is basically criticism that's unwarranted. He picked them up where they are now and left them at the end of the season where he picked them up from. So you could say the decline was becoming deeper and he arrested the decline, or you could say that he simply did what was already there, which is maintain the status quo.
His task would have been keep us up.
Yeah, I think the Benitez dismissal was not just based upon footballing results. It was based upon a backdrop of the fans waiting for an opportunity to turn on Rafa Benitez because they didn't want him there in the first place. So Benitez, as a football manager, has a far more compelling track record based upon experience and achievement than Frank Lampard. So you would have probably wagered that at some point Benitez would have righted the wrongs. I know it was a dreadful result against Norwich that started the end for him, and Frank was brought in on the back of that. But I don't necessarily think that Frank has done anything more than Rafa Benitez would have done, but he's done it. In the individual game, you know, it is beyond comprehension that Everton wouldn't have gone into that second half with far more intensity and desire than Crystal Palace would have ever had in that game. Now, I almost feel the need to recuse myself from this conversation because whatever I say will be taken as some sort of perspective that once upon a time I was involved with Crystal Palace, so I can't see beyond Crystal Palace. Mm-hmm. But I look at the second half, Palace were, you know, they didn't play well in the second half, but Everton's intensity, that team, that group of players that were being celebrated by fans on the pitch afterwards shouldn't be celebrated because they're the same players that put them in the cart for this ridiculous situation that they found themselves in. But they got themselves together in the second half because the Goodison crowd, alongside of course the players' performances, I know before you jump in, Martin, but the Goodison crowd has dragged them across the line in results games against Manchester United, in games against Chelsea, and of course in this particular game. So I wasn't surprised that in the second half, the moment they got that first goal in the 57th minute when it was, Palace was still creating chances, but this was not a game that Palace needed to get anything from. It's not a game that Palace would have the intensity. You had absolute intensity off the radar from that crowd. Now, you would have to be particularly gifted and a real non-entity not to have been able to respond to that. That's why I'm reading comments about, what you got to say about Dele Alli now, as an example. Well, if you can't come off the bench and lift yourself for one particular game, then you are a particular brand of non-entity that people would want to look at from a very different perspective. But they've done the job. I didn't think Everton would get relegated. I thought then, Martin, I think you pinpointed this game as they needed to have won this game. They did what they needed to do. I was critical on Twitter last night about, are you guys really going on a pitch and celebrating a team that spent $500 million over 5 years that has almost got itself relegated. Now, I understand the argument will be it's relief, but it almost gives these players and this management structure and these coaches a pass because you're fourth from bottom in the league or fifth from bottom in the league with a club of this size and magnitude and a spend pattern over the years that's brought you to a point that you are so bad that you've had to rely on other teams being worse.
If we look at the story and we look at, I know when he arrived in the job, they were 16th, and you say that's where they were now.
Yeah.
But in that time, Newcastle, with the new ownership and the money and the changes, dragged themselves to safety. And
Leeds have dragged themselves down.
And Everton saw that happen, and then they've seen Burnley with a new manager do the same. And I think Everton then fell into the bottom three. I think they've showed a tremendous amount of character to bounce back from that with a young manager. I think it tested Frank Lampard to the absolute limit. I always like to see top former players become top managers, and this is going to help him to do that, hopefully. I think he's learning a lot. I think when he was maybe at Chelsea, and this is like a view of me, I've never been a part of Chelsea, but it was quite cutthroat, that football club. I think now he's been at Everton, I think this is a people club. It's all about people, and I sense he's got a special relationship, the way that they've treated him. That spreads to his players, and he seems like he's much more in touch with the players he's got now, and he's got incredible results. Let's be fair, incredible results. He has to build on that now.
Well, you said this, that he's building something. You sense that. Where can they go from here?
Well, also, again, I mean, I like Frank Lampard, and I've been an advocate of his and talked out about what I felt at the time was an unfair sacking at Chelsea, given the brief that he was given, and he was delivering on the brief, and then all of a sudden the brief changed. I think the timing of some of the games they've played have been quite fortuitous. They've played Leicester City, a demoralised Leicester City after losing a particular game that's derailed their season. They've played Chelsea after Chelsea losing a game that's derailed their season, which is the Champions League.
Yeah, but Everton still have to come to the fore in those games.
That Salford could probably beat. So you look at these two, they've still got to win these games.
Yeah.
And he's still got to get and if nothing else, those Everton players owed that second half performance to their fans because of the disgrace of a quarter-final of the FA Cup they put out against Selhurst Park against Palace 2-3 months earlier. He's done the job that he was brought in to do.
Just the view from the Palace fans. Patrick Vieira, listening last night to the interview, was saying, look, they were magnificent in that first half.
Yeah.
And
we let him in.
And what it was, basically, the crowd were allowed to wake up because everyone was stunned.
Yeah.
There was their simplicity of their play disappeared. And when you go 2-0 up, sometimes you take liberties. You take too many touches. You run with the ball when you should pass, and you get your decision making wrong. And it's a change that takes. And now they didn't manage the game very well. So that's where Patrick would be angry and annoyed that this young group of players. It's been a really exciting story for Crystal Palace this season. Some fantastic talent that they've got there, and I expect them to go from strength to strength next season. They are ahead of Everton in that process. But Patrick would have been disappointed and annoyed. And maybe that led to some of what went on afterwards.
And he said that, didn't he? He said that we gave them an opportunity. We gave them a lift. We helped them along the way because they were dead and buried. At 2-0, Palace. This was a coast for Palace. And
Michael Keane's goal, though, is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a great goal.
Finish.
I mean, given the fact that he's been under huge criticism for his defensive performance for most of the season, he's come up at a moment, and that kick-started the revival, and then Palace started to wobble, and momentum was taken away from them. And, I knew the moment Everton scored that first goal, I knew they were going to go on and win because they had more to play for than Palace. Yeah. And Palace are professional footballers that still want to play for a position. But when you've got a team in front of you that's got 38,000 fans screaming you at every single ball, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're being dragged and kicking, screaming, Martin, right?
Credit to Calvert-Lewin as well for actually getting the goal that he has evaded him, really, throughout the season. He had a nightmare season of injury. I mean, last year it looked like he'd made that extra step under Ancelotti, where they finished, 10th, started the season on fire. We've hardly seen him, but there he comes. When he needs most, he turns up.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.